Good morning and welcome to this first session on Microsoft Modern Desktop. My name is Ed Baker, I'm a technical evangelist with Microsoft UK, and it's a pleasure to be here talking to you today, and thank you to PowerON for hosting this event. I'm going to cover today just the introductory outline of what the vision of the Microsoft Modern Desktop is, how we're changing, where we've come from, because it's important to recognise where we've come from in the story of our desktop solution. If you're interested and want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at edbaker1965, and I blog quite extensively about all of our products, mostly the Enterprise Mobility Suite and Office 365 at ed-baker.com. So let's have a look at our less modern desktops. If you're like me and experienced, or as some people would say, old, I have experience of using all sorts of our desktops. For those of you I've given away here by version 101, this was Windows 1. Windows 1 was our first WIMP, Windows icons, menus and pointers, WYSIWYG type interface. And as you can see, it's effectively text in colour. There's not a great deal here for us to play about with. We then move on to Windows 3. Windows 3 was the first major advance in the very early 1990s. Windows 3.1, and for those of us that ever ran networks, Windows 3.11, the Windows for Workgroups, was something that a lot of people used as a server operating system, but never in fact was, and the very famous Solitaire and Minesweeper. There's an awful lot of people that love Minesweeper. We then move on to Windows 95. I remember buying the memory necessary to run Windows 95 in 1995. It cost me hundreds of pounds to double my memory from 4 to 8 megabytes. 4 to 8 megabytes. And that was only 21 years ago. We then have Windows XP. Windows XP has only just gone off most people's platforms. There are staggeringly still a lot of people using this in a business environment. If that's you, please come and talk to us about that, because it is no longer a secure environment. We're not updating this and not supporting this anymore. We've got Windows Vista, which we'll move across, and Windows 7. Windows 7, the vast majority of the people out there at the moment are still using Windows 7. It is a fairly modern, fairly secure, fairly robust operating system that people love and know how to use. We then introduced Windows 8. And from my perspective, Windows 8 was introduced 3 or 4 years too early, because the majority of people using it were not using a touch environment, but it was built for a touch environment. And we didn't give you the option, really, to be able to manage this without a touch environment. So we introduced Windows 8.1, and Windows 8.1 removed the reliance on touch. It still was a very good touch interface, but it didn't get the adoption we were hoping it would get. And so we have now introduced our modern desktop. Our modern desktop, which over 300 million of you are now using, is Windows 10. You've got the familiarity of the menu and all of the icons and features from Windows 7. But in addition to that, you have the new live tiles and touch facilities of Windows 8 and 8.1. It's a blend and the best of both worlds. But far more importantly than how this thing looks, it's what's underneath and how it interacts with your servers and your operating systems from an enterprise level to be able to secure and manage this on a mobile and enterprise method. Mobility. One of our Chief Executive, Satya Nadella's main options is to empower people to be far more productive and to allow them to do great things. And to do that, we need to give them the freedom to do it wherever they are, using whatever tools they have at their disposal. We're talking about mobility in terms of your mobility as a workplace, not your mobility as where you're standing. It's what you're doing and where you're doing it. As an example, we've got some research here. I think this is Forrester research. 56% of people surveyed said they send their first email before they arrive in the office. I often run a quick survey in my sessions of how many actually check their email before they get out of bed, and it's probably about 56% as well. 73% send it when they get home. They've finished work for the day. We no longer work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, 8 to 4 in an office. We're no longer tied by a piece of Ethernet cable to our only method of communicating. So we are much more mobile. As an example, I'm in Reading today, but I drove here from my home just south of Birmingham, and I drive an electric vehicle. I stopped halfway to charge up. I did email. I didn't do email from a computer. I didn't do it from a laptop. I did it from my Windows phone. I sat in my car, drank a nice cappuccino and did some email. I'm mobile in every sense of the word. And of course, the explosion of bring your own devices and choose your own device from an employer now means that we have millions and millions of devices that are out there that are not under the same level of control that we, certainly me as an IT administrator, am used to. I used to be able to say, that's what you're using, that's what it'll look like, and that's what you'll do. We don't do that anymore. We let people use their own devices, put our data on their device. Now, for most IT admin, that's a fairly scary thing. You'll see throughout the day today just why that isn't scary using Windows 10, things like Enterprise Mobility Suite, Config Manager, and all of the tools that allow you to be thoroughly secure. Some more statistics here. People work from different locations. I've already worked from 3 locations today, and I'll probably work from another one later when I go into the office after I finish the session. I normally do a survey of how many devices people use. I'm looking at a desk in front of me. I've got 4 of my own devices here, 3 on a table, 1 which is my backup in a drawer, in a bag over there. I'm looking at other people in the room. None of you have got 1 device. You've all got more than 1 device. Last survey I did on this, the highest number I had was 7. One individual had 7 devices on which he does anything to do with work, whether that be his Xbox, because you can do email on Xbox, or his home PC, or his iPad, or his Kindle Fire, or whatever he wants to use, he can use it for work and experience. And of course, the number of apps we're using for work, I don't necessarily consider apps from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store as work apps, but indeed they are. So we've got my entire expense infrastructure is based on Dynamics, which is available as an application in all sorts of platforms. And so I have lots of applications that I need to download and use, both for work in enterprise and work elsewhere. But the thing that's most scary to most administrators is our data. Data is key. Data is the thing that runs our businesses. It's how we get the insights into our customers, how we understand our markets and our audiences. And if we don't have secure data and we can't reliably manage our data in a mobile environment, we're in trouble. So we need to ensure that people that use work tablets or their own tablets for work actually have security on that data. And you as an administrator are able to secure it. This particular slide is one that intrigues me and I find very interesting, and it's right. Mobility is the new normal. The number of people now that get up, go to work on 1 device, never use another device, and then go home, and that device is fixed in a building, tiny now. Certainly where I work in Reading, I can't think of any desk where, other than the reception desks, when you walk into the building, where there is a fixed device. There is not 1 telephone I can use at work. I can't sit at a desk and pick up a phone. I use Skype for Business. So mobility is entirely the new normal. But as well as being mobile, we have an awful number of employees who will own up to the fact that they use software as service applications like, I don't know, Box, Dropbox, all that sort of stuff, that isn't approved by their employer, but they use it to help them do their job. Now, as an IT administrator, I don't want my corporate data that I store nicely and safely in, I don't know, OneDrive for Business or SharePoint or wherever else I store it. I don't want my employees then moving that to a non-secured, non-managed environment using other applications. I don't mind them putting it there if it's secure and if I can manage it. But what is driving our change? We've got a whole bunch of different requirements from each end of the spectrum. The user. Users are becoming more and more demanding. They want more of this, more of that, and they want it now. They want to use different devices. They want different platforms of device. They want to use different applications on all of those devices, accessing all of their data. Whereas you as the IT person, or the business decision maker, or the finance director, absolutely want to make sure that you can tie down and control the resources they're using if they belong to the company. But as the user, you don't want your own personal device entirely locked down. You want to be able to use your bits for what you want and let the company manage the bits they use. This is where the Enterprise Mobility Suite from Microsoft helps. It's not a single product, it's a marketing conglomeration of a bunch of really leading edge products that help you manage your devices, your identities, your data and your applications. Several sessions today are going to go into the details of what comes in Enterprise Mobility Suite to allow you to do that. The good thing I find about the Enterprise Mobility Suite is we're not saying you have to move all the way across to that and only use that. All of our new products are entirely integrated into our on-premises products as well. So for instance, Microsoft Intune, which is the backbone to our Enterprise Mobility Suite, integrates into System Center Configuration Manager to allow you to use your tried and trusted and your investments into that software to do your management if you want to. Here's an example. Here, this happens to be a tablet, let's call it an iPad. That's because it is an iPad. There are 4 different levels of control that we could or should have on this email. This is an Outlook email, and I want to be able to ensure that my user's identity is safe and secure and I know who the user is. I want to be able to make sure that this monthly business budget, this spreadsheet, is controlled, secured, maybe encrypted and managed. I also want to make sure that the application itself I can control, so that if I have 2 different email accounts in that application, that I can't move data from one to the other. And I also want to be able to make sure that the device itself is controlled. I want to make sure that any data that I store on that device that's business data, my data, is encrypted. I want to make sure that when you ring me up in a panic and say, hey Ed, I've lost my iPad, I can go, don't worry, and I can press one button and that will be wiped. I know you can track your own Android and an iPad, an iPhone and iPad devices, but if they're managed by Intune, we can wipe them. If you haven't lost it and you've just left the organisation, I can wipe it selectively. I can just remove my data from it and leave you all your applications, which you've spent many years choosing the right app, which football manager you're going to play and which video platform you're going to use to watch your videos. They don't have to go. So it's all about managing the data, managing the application, managing the device and controlling the user. And using our tools, we can do that. The good thing about the platform is that the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suite uses the Azure Active Directory as its core identity and access management solution. So things like Intune, Office 365, OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, and all the other applications we use will be able to use one identity. It doesn't matter where that identity sits. I can use my on-premises identity and keep it and store it in my Azure Active Directory to be able to authenticate in the cloud as well if I want to. So the device is not able to access Office 365, OneDrive or any of the on-premises solutions until Intune has authenticated that device for things like compliance. Is the device encrypted? Is it the right type of device? If it's an iPad, is it jailbroken? Or if it's an iPhone, is it jailbroken? If it is, I'm not going to let my data sit on there because I've got underneath the security and I can no longer control it. As soon as I've proved it's compliant, I can then apply a bunch of configuration policies to this to say what applications it can use, who can use them, where they can be used. And that allows me to control my data. And let's face it, the data is the most important thing here that we're managing to control. So here we have an example of on-premises data and a bunch of mobile devices and web browsers. That's fairly easy to control. I have tools now that control my on-premises data. If I've got access to it, or if I've got authentication, I can give people access to it. But because it's physically stored on premises, I can control who can get at it, what they can do with it, and where they can use it. Currently, using those devices without any form of mobile device management, I cannot control anything that sits in the cloud or that doesn't sit directly within my sphere of control. As soon as I manage that cloud, and I use tools to be able to manage the data and manage the on-premises solutions, I can access the data, I can encrypt it, I can control it, and I can prevent people from using it. So that's managing my mobile devices. That's fairly easy to do. It doesn't take very long. You'll see later today exactly how easy that is. But Windows 10, our most modern, most secure, best Windows ever, has also given you all of the best-of-breed products you've had in the past for upgrading, updating, but we've added some more, some really good, fast solutions. What deployment choices have I got? You'll see there's a new one in the middle, which I'll talk about in a minute. But on the left-hand side here, we've got in place. All you IT pros out there are well used to doing in-place upgrades. not a problem. Nothing has changed there. We've updated some of our tools. You can still do in-place upgrades from Windows 7, 8 and 8.1, and that's recommended device. So our recommended solution for those devices is to do an in-place upgrade. If you want to do a wipe and load, you've got an operating system that isn't Windows or is older than Windows 7, or you have specific things you want to add to it, then we can still do a wipe and load. We can build our images, inject apps, inject drivers, use the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, use Windows Deployment Services, and we can use that solution. But we've got a brand new one in the middle called provisioning. And we can convert a Windows Home, for example, Windows 10 Home, into an enterprise without ever having it anywhere near our control. So as an example, little story. Imagine I'm Jill, I live in Inverness, say, and I'm going to work for a company, but I'm going to be a home worker and I never go to that company. They send me an email to my ordinary email address with some credentials in. They also send me a voucher and I go to another supplier, could be PC World, could be Currys, could be anywhere, any supplier, and I buy a device to the value that they've given me. That device I then bring home, I log into it and start it up with my new credentials. I have internet access, which is fairly key. Because the credentials I've been given are my Office 365 Microsoft Azure credentials, Azure Active Directory credentials, I can now join this device to my Azure Active Directory. That allows me to immediately connect it to Windows or Microsoft Intune management, and then I have a managed device. But better than that, I can then receive an email from my Office 365 in which will be a small provisioning package. And that provisioning package will put a new key, some applications, it'll remove Candy Crush Saga or any of those really good business apps you really want on your business device. And it will allow me to completely change a home device into an enterprise device just like that, without the old traditional, oh, I've got to build a new image, I've got to bring it in, I've got to change it. It will need a reboot, but other than that, it doesn't need anything else at all. Jill hasn't had to get an expensive train journey all the way down to London where we work, come and have an induction. She can do all that remotely using Office 365 video or something like that. And you as an IT department have not had to go through the procurement pains of getting a device, imaging it, putting all the apps on, putting all the credentials on, and sending it through the post to Jill up in Inverness. So for mobile workers, provisioning is a fantastic tool. As I mentioned, moving in place, we support that for enterprises and we support it. It's a simplified solution. We allow it for 7, 8 and 8.1. It's the quickest, easiest way, and it uses the standard Windows 10 image as well. You wouldn't move in place when you're going from 32-bit to 64-bit, because we still can't do that. When you're using a Windows to Go, that's the USB-based Windows to Go stick, or you want to boot from a VHD, you wouldn't do that either. You wouldn't when you're changing from the old BIOS, Basic Input-Output System, to the UEFI, the Unified Extensible Firmware, I can't remember what the I is. You wouldn't use it for dual or multi-boot, and you wouldn't use it when you're going to create a gold image. You can't sysprep once you've done this, once you've done the upgrade. And if you're using non-BitLocker encryption tools, we wouldn't recommend you move in place either. But to transform the device, to enable an enterprise SKU, or to install apps, to enroll the device into mobile device management, to do all sorts of other clever tools like that, we've provided you a solution within the Microsoft ADK toolkit, which allows you to download the Imaging and Configuration Designer. That will create a small application X package. The runtime is installed on Windows 10 already, and you can send that package out on a USB stick. You can send it out on an email. You can you can NFC it if it's a phone. You can do a quick code, a scan code, to pull down that from the web if you want to. So it's provisioning, not re-imaging. You can do all of these things. You can use it for Azure AD joining. You bring your own devices. You can push the policies down through MDM and send the application X packages down as well. And here's the new tool, the Imaging and Configuration Designer. It will allow you to create images as well. It's an add-on to that tool, allows you to create images. But here I've just done a screenshot of me upgrading an edition with a license. You can do it with a key or a license if you want. And it allows you to put your enterprise key into this tool securely, encrypt it, send it out, and it will update any machine to enterprise. That saves a lot of time, an awful lot of time. For traditional deployment, we've made some changes, but not many. We want you to still be comfortable with how you do this stuff. You're IT pros, you're used to doing things in a particular way. If you don't need any of the new tools, we're not making you change your ways. You can still capture a Windows 10 image. You can still use it for wipe and load if you want to. But we've also enhanced those. So the new ADK Assessment Deployment Kit has some new tools in as well. We've changed System Center to add support for all of these new tools as well. So we've dealt with mobile device management, we've dealt with upgrades, provisioning, wipes and loads. Now servicing. There's been a lot of talk since we released Windows almost 12 months ago, Windows 10 almost 12 months ago now, about Windows as a service. Windows as a service was built to help us do lots of things, or to help you as the customer do lots of things. Still maintain control from an enterprise level, but for the vast majority of users, and if we meet Satya's 2018 1 billion users, the vast majority of that billion users will not be enterprise users. So they don't want to be restricted to the type of updates and upgrades that we're going to be doing in the enterprise. So we need to give them an ability to update as they used to. So the consumer devices will receive everything they used to receive from Windows Update. As and when they're changed and new features are released, we release new additions and new features through Windows Update. In fact, whole new images, flighting images of the next one to come down will probably be the anniversary update sometime in the summer. You'll receive effectively a whole new operating system through Windows Update. You don't have to get an ISO or a USB key or a DVD to plug in. It will all be done through Windows Update. And a lot of businesses are going to be keeping their bring your own devices and also some of their less important, less secure devices in the enterprise using this method. We've then got the devices, which I for one particularly don't ever want updated till it's tested. Things like air traffic control, emergency services. We don't want things suddenly stopping in the middle of an event because we haven't tested them. So we have special systems, or the long-term servicing branch, that allows us to get security updates but no new features, nothing we don't need. That's quite a key aspect of the new system, and you will still control that using Windows Server Update Services, or WSUS. But there's a bit in the middle. Your enterprise users aren't consumer devices and they don't want the special systems. We want to be able to manage these devices and maybe not take the updates the moment they're released, but take them a little bit later. Business users are traditionally caught in the middle. Business users, we want to test, we want to plan, we want maybe a sandbox solution to download these updates and say, actually that new feature, enterprise device protection, is something I really want to deploy in my enterprise, but I'm not going to deploy it until I've tested it. Or Device Guard, or some of the really new powerful Windows 10 features. Or maybe just your standard updates. So you don't want to use one of those. So we've introduced Windows Update for Business. And Windows Update for Business allows you to set when you want your devices to be updated and how long you want to delay, whether updates or new features. And you can defer those, and you'll see how that's done later on today. In fact, I've got a screenshot in a minute of where you can do that. So you can now use group policy or local group policy to defer deployment of new features completely for up to 8 months. And you can defer security updates for a number of weeks. If you defer them too long, you will drop out of the zone of health, I'll call it, and you won't receive any new features after that until you bring it back into management. So here you would go to settings and advanced options and you would say defer upgrades. That would prevent you from receiving the anniversary update, for instance, or any new features. And if you want to manage it using this tool here, which is computer config, admin templates, Windows Update, if you click enabled, it will then give you two drop downs for how long you want to defer your updates and how long you want to defer your upgrades for. Two separate solutions there. But we have some alternatives as well. So we've covered so far, we've covered devices themselves, we've covered enterprise mobility, we've covered how you update and upgrade your devices, the fact we can go from Windows 7 all the way to Windows 10 without necessarily inconveniencing our users or our IT department. But that isn't all we've got in terms of the modern desktop. We have two tools, and I know you're going to get a demonstration of both of these tools a little bit later. The first one is Continuum. Now, when Continuum first came out, it's now changed to tablet mode on your normal tablets. If you remove your keyboard or you twist it round, it will give you the option to turn your fully functional laptop into a tablet device. On a phone, on one of our enterprise phones, so the Lumia 950 or the Microsoft Lumia 950 or the 950 XL, it will allow you to run Continuum for the phone. And Continuum for the phone allows you to have a desktop experience from a phone from one or two separate screens, either wirelessly or using the display dock for Continuum. And this is the display dock here. So we've got display dock sitting over there. It allows you to connect an HDMI screen and or a DisplayPort screen. It's got 3 USB 3 slots, one of which is a fast charger. And it allows you to connect your phone. So here is Windows 10. That's a perfectly normal Windows 10 screen, but it's actually running on a phone. That's not how Windows 10 looks on your phone. It's the same menu, but you don't have all this real estate. Any application on that screen that is a universal Windows platform application will run full screen on a desktop, even of this size, and you'll see a demonstration of that later. If you unplug the dock or stop it running Continuum, they'll still be running in the phone, but they will have shrunk back down to the display you would normally have. As an example, and I don't know if this is going to be demonstrated later, if you run Outlook, Microsoft Outlook on your phone, you'll see the traditional just emails. If I then plug that in as a Continuum phone, it will expand that and I'll see the folders and the inbox and all of the other features of the Windows Mobile Outlook, because it's the same application. So if I download Windows Mobile, the Universal Windows Platform app on my Surface here, it would be running exactly the same as it was on Continuum. Anything that won't run in a Universal Windows Platform app, you can run as a remote desktop, either on premises or a remote app on premises, or indeed as Azure Remote App. Before I move to Azure Remote App, this dock here, you can also plug wired keyboard and mouse into, or you can Bluetooth, which is what I do, Bluetooth a keyboard and mouse onto your phone, and you can plug external hard drives and USB keys into the dock to give you all the storage you might need. So essentially, we could be doing all of this, and you actually don't know whether I am or I'm not, doing all of this from Continuum, because it would look no different. You no longer have to carry huge, great rucksacks around. You can just carry, in fact, I've got one here, you could just carry a small phone and use that as your main device. The second option is Azure Remote App. Remote App in a server allows you to run applications running on a server and present them to a client desktop running in a remote desktop window. It's exactly the same in our Azure Remote App. The only difference is the server you don't own and it's not physical. It runs as a virtual server in Azure, and you just have the applications on that Azure system. It allows you to run anything that will run in Windows Server 2012 R2, whether as long as it's a Windows 32 type application currently. I can connect my on-premises data, and I'm fairly certain you'll get a demo of that later. I can run applications that have high 3D imaging requirements from the server. It allows me to use my Azure Active Directory to control which users have this. So if I can't run it on Continuum and I can't run it on my desktop, I can run it in Azure. So there we have our Microsoft Modern Desktop. Hopefully throughout the day today you will see examples of System Center configuration, managing our desktop, Microsoft Intune. I know we're possibly also going to go into the management suite, the new Microsoft Operations Management Suite that will allow you to manage your on-premises and your cloud-based servers and applications and get a dashboard of all that's going on, whether they be updates, security or whatever. I hope you have an excellent day in the rest of the sessions, and thank you for listening.